Okay, good morning. So let's get into day 3, Genesis 1:9. Then God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters he called seas. God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself on the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, the herb that yields seed according to its kind, and the tree that yields fruit, whose seed is in itself according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. So evening and morning were the third day. We said at the end of the day too that we had a water world that had then had the water drawn from it to form a bubble. And so it's interesting that now we have the water that's left on the planet's surface gathered into one place. And so we can picture a small ocean. Remember that, the planet that we're used to now is very different. We're used to lots of islands and continents, interspersed with oceans and seas and waterways. But actually at that time, of course, actually it describes something quite different. For one thing, there's only one continent and there's only one ocean, which is in one place. All right. It's interesting, to think of how different that must have been. Okay, nowadays it's 3/4 water and 1/4 land, but I imagine it would have been something like the opposite. Mostly land and just a little bit of sea. All right. And it's also interesting that now that plants start to grow and that God brings forth all of these seed-bearing things, it's important to picture this in our minds in the sense that there would have been just plants, there's no animals at this point. Now, what's interesting is that in nature, animals need plants and plants need animals. They can't live without each other. Now, it's interesting to think that, of course, according to evolution, then plants came along for billions of years before there were animals. And the thing is, plants can't live without animals. And so actually the whole thing starts to fall apart. And when you actually look at the Bible, it makes much more sense because actually these plants were only here for a day before the animals actually were created as well. Right. And when you remember that balance within nature, actually you start to see that creationism can actually make a lot more sense than evolution as a scientific norm. Okay, so I believe that the days are literal 24-hour days, and therefore these plants only had to be there for a short while before animals were created to look after them. It's also significant that there's an anti-evolution statement sort of stitched into these passages because it's according to their kinds. Okay, they can't turn into another kind. A bird cannot produce something else. A reptile cannot produce a bird. And the thing is that everything's according to their kinds. Of course, actually, this is talking specifically about plants, but the same principle applies that you can't get a different plant from these plants which are made. So what was made, and they're exactly the same now. I think it's interesting. I saw once a thing about some dinosaur bones that have been discovered, and along with them there were some fossilized plants, and it was amazing because the plants were in fact identical to the ones which grow in our gardens now. In fact, specifically it was a rose. Okay, and I thought, yeah, okay, so that hasn't changed for billions of years, but dinosaurs have turned into completely different animals. It's contradictory. Actually, of course, there's no evidence that animals have ever changed. Okay, so that's a big no to evolution, and I throw that out there because there's many people who try to compromise creationism with evolution, and they try to come up with sort of theistic evolution, like animals have changed with God's help and that kind of stuff. And actually, you end up trying to please everybody, but you end up actually pleasing nobody. So I would just say, look, make your mind up. Do you believe that there's a God? Then believe in creation. If you don't believe there's a God, then believe in evolution. But remember this, it's not scientific, but creation is. All right then. So Yes, you may say there's evolution within a species. Of course, you can adapt and you can breed and you can change. My son is different from me and I'm different from my father. And so there's changes from generation to generation, but we're all human beings. We all have the same genetic code. I urge you to look at my testimony about the thought process that I went through as an atheist looking at science, and I realized that evolution was impossible, and that's why I became a believer. I didn't come from a fundamentalist Bible believing background. I came from an atheistic um, point of view, and I went through a thought process which left me in a real crisis, because I really examined evolution from a DNA, irreducible complexity, geological evidence. I looked at all those things, and it led me to faith. So science leads you to faith, true science, that is, not theoretical or wishful thinking science. All right. So that's day 3. That's all I want to say about that. Fairly simple. And again, as I say at the end of each one, click subscribe. Feel free to share it. These are for the glory of God and for the joy of making them and to bless people. I just want to share the things that I see in the scriptures with God's blessing. Take care.